The crack of bone against metal echoed through the Alabama dawn as Officer Dale Harlan slammed Evelyn Carter's face into the hood of her own pickup truck. Blood trickled from her split lip onto the faded blue paint. "Another Carter rat," he sneered, his breath reeking of stale coffee and hatred. "Y'all never learn your place, do you?" But here's what Dale didn't see. Evelyn's left hand, pressed against her side, clutching a manila envelope that would detonate his family's empire in less than 48 hours. 2 days later, that same envelope would expose a secret so explosive it would collapse Judge Harlan Brooks mid-sentence, turning a routine sentencing into the most shocking courtroom drama Willow Creek had ever witnessed. The morning started like any other for Evelyn Carter, a 52-year-old nurse driving home from her overnight shift at Montgomery General. Route 65 stretched empty before her, magnolia trees casting long shadows across cracked asphalt. Her Ford pickup hummed along, radio playing gospel hymns that couldn't drown out the exhaustion in her bones. Then came the flashing lights. Dale Harlan's cruiser appeared in her rearview mirror like a predator stalking prey. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Everyone in Willow Creek knew about Dale's special attention to black drivers. Shakedowns disguised as traffic stops, power trips that fed his family's century-old appetite for control. She pulled over, hands trembling as she reached for her license. Through her side mirror, she watched Dale swagger toward her truck, his hand resting on his service weapon. The mustache beneath his aviators twitched with anticipation. "License and registration," he barked, not bothering with pleasantries. His eyes scanned her driver's license, and something shifted in his expression. "Carter, you related to that troublemaker preacher up in Montgomery?" "No, sir," Evelyn replied, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "I think you're lying." Dale's voice dropped to a whisper. "Step out of the vehicle, now." Evelyn complied, moving slowly, hands visible. But compliance meant nothing to a Harlan. Dale spun her around, wrists burning as metal cuffs bit into her skin. "Resisting arrest," he announced into his radio, even as she stood frozen, silent. The dash cam would later show the truth. A black woman standing motionless while a white cop fabricated charges. But in Willow Creek, truth was a luxury reserved for those with the right last name and the right skin color. The ride to county lockup passed in a blur of shame and rage. Evelyn stared through the wire mesh separating her from Dale, watching him hum along to country music as if he hadn't just destroyed her life over a traffic violation that never existed. By noon, her mug shot blazed across Facebook groups and WhatsApp chains. Neighbors on Elm Street gathered in hushed clusters, voices dripping with judgment. Linda Thompson, the white widow next door, stood on her porch shaking her head. "Always knew something was off about that family," she whispered to anyone who'd listen. "Those people always find trouble." But 60 miles north in Huntsville, Marcus Carter smelled something rotten in his mother's arrest. The mechanic had grown up hearing his father's stories about the Harlan family's stranglehold on Willow Creek, how Judge Brooks had covered up embezzlement at First Baptist Church, where his brother preached prosperity while pocketing collection plate money for Florida vacations. Marcus knew the family history ran deeper than small-town corruption. His own relatives had fled north during the Civil Rights era, escaping lynchings tied to the Harlan's ancestors. The same tree that bore Judge Brooks had produced generations of men. Freeman's hand trembled slightly as he resumed shaving. "The Harlans been running this town since before my granddaddy was born. Ain't nothing changed except they wear badges now instead of white hoods." Unknown to either barbershop, a figure in a charcoal suit and fedora sat in his rental car outside the courthouse, watching courthouse employees filter home. He'd been tracking the Harlan family secrets for 18 months, following a paper trail that led from Birmingham drug rings to church collection plates. The mysterious man, who'd introduced himself to contacts only as Gabriel, had been feeding information to Evelyn Carter through anonymous notes slipped under her front door. But tonight's delivery would be different. Tonight, he was gambling everything on DNA evidence that could topple a dynasty. Meanwhile, Marcus Carter paced his Huntsville garage, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke with his mother's assigned public defender. Tom Riley sounded exhausted and overwhelmed. "Look, Marcus, I've got 17 other cases this month," Riley's voice crackled through the speaker. "Your mother was caught resisting arrest. The best I can do is plead it down to a fine and community service." "Resisting arrest?" Marcus's wrench clattered to the concrete floor. "My mama's been taking care of white patients for 30 years. She doesn't resist anything. She heals people." "The dash cam footage is inconclusive," Riley hedged. "Judge Brooks doesn't like defendants who waste his time with appeals." Marcus hung up, fury burning in his chest. He'd grown up hearing his father's warnings about the Harlan family's reach, how they'd crushed anyone who dared challenge their authority. His great-uncle had fled Alabama in 1963 after witnessing Judge Brooks's father coordinate with Klan members to terrorize civil rights organizers. The stories came flooding back: mysterious house fires that consumed activists' homes, car accidents that claimed the lives of vocal church leaders, disappeared voting records that silenced black voices for decades. The Harlans had perfected the art of legal lynching, using courtrooms instead of rope. But as Marcus scrolled through social media that night, building a network of supporters for his mother's case, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. A genealogy website showed DNA connections he'd never seen before, family trees that linked the Carters to names he'd been taught to fear. The revelation hit him like a freight train. His mother might be carrying more than just the burden of false charges. She might be carrying the truth about bloodlines that could destroy everything the Harlans had built. Back in her cell, Evelyn lay awake listening to the sounds of county lockup, steel doors clanging, guards' footsteps echoing through corridors, the distant sobbing of other women caught in the system's grinding teeth. But her mind wasn't on the cold concrete or the scratchy blanket. She was thinking about the day 23 years ago when her dying mother, Rosa Carter, whispered a confession that had haunted Evelyn's dreams ever since. Rosa had worked as a housekeeper at First Baptist Church in the early 1970s, cleaning the sanctuary and pastor's office for barely enough money to feed her children. "That old pastor," Rosa had whispered with her final breaths, "he took what wasn't his to take, said nobody would believe a colored woman over a man of God." Rosa had carried the secret of assault and its aftermath to her deathbed, but not before extracting a promise from Evelyn. Someday, when the time was right, the truth would surface. The DNA evidence in that hidden envelope wasn't just proof of paternity. It was documentation of a crime that connected Evelyn's bloodline to the very family that had oppressed her people for generations. A shadow passed by her cell window, the night guard making his rounds. But for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw a figure in a fedora slip something through the bars of the adjoining empty cell. Brooks nodded approvingly at his nephew's testimony. "Continue, Officer Harlan." "The defendant exhibited classic signs of aggression, Your Honor. Raised voice, threatening posture, refusal to comply with lawful orders." Dale's eyes found Evelyn in the defendant's chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "In my professional opinion, she represents a clear and present danger to public safety." Riley's objection came weakly. "Your Honor, the dashcam footage clearly shows—" "Overruled." Brooks' gavel crashed down like thunder. "This court will not tolerate frivolous interruptions. The officer's testimony stands." What followed was a parade of character assassination disguised as law enforcement procedure. Deputy Sheriff Mike Patterson, Dale's partner, described Evelyn's suspicious behavior during booking, how she'd remained silent instead of protesting her innocence, which he claimed was evidence of guilt. "Innocent people talk, Your Honor," Patterson testified, his southern drawl thick as molasses. "Guilty ones clam up and hire lawyers."
The gallery erupted in scattered applause from the white section, quickly silenced by Brooks' warning glare. But the damage was done. The theater of injustice was playing exactly as scripted, with Evelyn cast as the villain in her own persecution. Body search procedures were described in graphic detail, each violation of dignity catalogued like evidence of wrongdoing. Guard Lisa Henderson, a pale woman with dead eyes, testified about Evelyn's contraband, a folded envelope that had been confiscated and sealed as evidence. The defendant was clearly attempting to smuggle unknown materials into the facility. Standard protocol required full cavity search and isolation pending investigation. Laughter tittered from the back rows of white spectators as humiliation compounded upon humiliation. Evelyn sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on a point just beyond Judge Brooks's head. She was waiting for her moment, letting them build their house of lies higher and higher before she lit the match that would burn it all down. Riley's cross-examination was pathetic, softball questions that allowed prosecution witnesses to repeat their fabricated stories with even more conviction. When he attempted to introduce dash-cam footage showing Evelyn's compliance, Brooks ruled it inadmissible due to technical irregularities. "The court finds the video evidence unreliable," Brooks declared, his tone suggesting the matter was closed. "Officer testimony carries far more weight than grainy footage that could be manipulated." The prosecution rested with a flourish, District Attorney Patricia Lawson painting Evelyn as a repeat offender despite her spotless record. "Your Honor, the defendant represents everything wrong with today's society. Disrespect for authority, lawlessness disguised as civil rights, and a dangerous sense of entitlement that threatens the very fabric of our community." As Riley rose for his defense, panic flickered across his face. He had no strategy, no witnesses, no hope of victory against the machine that ground black defendants into statistical dust. But before he could speak, Evelyn Carter stood up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom's oppressive atmosphere like a blade. "Before you render sentence, I invoke my right under Alabama Code Section 12-15-101 to present evidence of blood relation that directly impacts this court's jurisdiction." The courtroom froze. Riley's eyes widened in shock. He'd never heard of such a statute, never prepped for this moment. Judge Brooks leaned forward, his face draining of color, as Evelyn reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded document. "This DNA analysis, certified by the Atlanta Genomics Laboratory, proves that I am your half-sister, Judge Brooks, born from the sexual assault of my mother, Rosa Carter, by your father, Pastor Theodore Brooks, in the summer of 1971. The silence that followed was deafening. Then chaos erupted.
Outside the courthouse, car doors slammed as word spread through Willow Creek's digital networks. Marcus Carter's social media campaign had summoned protesters from across Alabama, civil rights activists, church groups, and college students who'd been waiting for exactly this moment to challenge the system. Their chants penetrated the courtroom's thick walls. "Justice for Rosa! Justice for Rosa!" Brooks's face had gone ashen gray, his breathing shallow and rapid. The chest pains that had been nagging him for months suddenly felt like an elephant sitting on his ribcage. I need a recess," he gasped, one hand clutching his left arm. "No recess," Evelyn declared, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to spring from generations of silenced ancestors. "My mother, Rosa Carter, was 19 years old when Pastor Theodore Brooks cornered her in the church basement after evening service. She was cleaning communion cups when he forced himself on her, telling her that no one would believe a colored girl over a man of God." The white section of the gallery recoiled as if slapped, but Evelyn continued relentlessly. "She carried his child, me, and raised me alone while he preached about purity and family values from the pulpit she scrubbed on her hands and knees. For 50 years, she kept his secret to protect her daughter from the shame of rape. But shame belongs to the rapist, not the child." Judge Brooks clutched his chest, his breathing growing more labored. But before anyone could call for medical assistance, the courtroom doors burst open. Marcus Carter led a wave of protesters into the chamber, their voices rising in unified demand for justice. In the chaos that followed, shouting matches between white and black sections, deputies struggling to maintain order, Brooks collapsing behind his bench, something extraordinary happened. Evelyn Carter walked to the judicial bench and picked up the gavel. "Order," she commanded, her voice booming through the courthouse with the authority of blood and birthright. "Order in this court." The room fell silent, stunned by the sight of a black woman in prisoner's scrubs commanding the very bench that had oppressed her people for generations. But Evelyn wasn't seizing power illegally. The will in her hand gave her legal standing as executor of the Brooks family trust, including influence over courthouse operations. "Court is adjourned," she announced, the gavel crashing down with finality. "Pending full investigation of corruption charges against this court and all its officers." As paramedics rushed to treat Brooks's apparent heart attack, Evelyn's eyes swept the courtroom one final time. Justice had been served, but something nagged at her consciousness, a shadow that had been moving through this entire ordeal. In the back corner of the gallery, barely visible through the chaos, a man in a charcoal fedora slipped toward the exit. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and he touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement before disappearing into the crowd. Who was he? The mysterious ally who'd been feeding her information, guiding her to this moment of triumph. And why did his smile look less like celebration and more like the beginning of something far more dangerous? As deputies removed her handcuffs, Evelyn found a note pressed into her palm. Phase 1 complete. The real Harlan secrets are buried in the church attic. Find the family Bible before they do. If you discovered your enemy was your blood, would you forgive them? Comment below, because this story is just beginning and the darkest secrets are still hidden in the shadows of Willow Creek. The courthouse erupted like a powder keg touched by lightning. Marcus Carter's iPhone livestream captured every explosive second as protesters flooded through the mahogany doors, their chants of justice for Rosa drowning out the bailiff's desperate calls for order. The feed showed Confederate portraits hanging crooked on the walls, their stern white faces now witnessing the collapse of everything they'd represented for 150 years. "Y'all seeing this?" Marcus shouted into his phone, the camera shaking his body.
The heart attack wasn't just physical. It was the spiritual collapse of a man whose entire identity had been built on a lie. "Get those cameras out of here!" Dale Harlan screamed at the deputies, but his voice was lost in the chaos. His uncle was turning blue behind the judicial bench, clutching his left arm as paramedics fought through the crowd. The family name that had opened every door in Alabama was now a scarlet letter burning across their foreheads. Linda Thompson, the white widow from Elm Street, stood frozen in the gallery, her mouth hanging open as decades of assumptions crumbled around her. "This can't be real," she whispered to no one in particular. "The Brooks family, they're pillars of the community. They built the new church wing." But Deacon Samuel Wright, his weathered face streaked with tears of vindication, turned to face her directly. "Built it with blood money, child. Rosa Carter's assault bought those stained glass windows and that organ you sing along to every Sunday." The visual contrast was stunning. Confederate generals in gilt frames glowering at a black woman in orange scrubs holding DNA evidence that proved their descendants' hypocrisy. Marcus's camera captured it all. White faces contorting with rage and denial, black faces glowing with righteous triumph, and Evelyn Carter standing at the center like an avenging angel with court documents instead of a flaming sword. District Attorney Patricia Lawson grabbed her briefcase and pushed toward the exit, her political career evaporating with every second the live stream continued. She'd built her reputation prosecuting black defendants in front of Judge Brooks, never questioning why her conviction rate was so unnaturally high. Now she understood. She'd been participating in a rigged game where family blood trumped actual justice. Tom Riley, Evelyn's public defender, stared at the DNA documents in his trembling hands. 23 years of practicing law in Alabama, and he'd never seen anything like this. The case that was supposed to be a routine plea bargain had just exposed the most explosive family secret in the state's modern history. "This changes everything," he muttered, though his words were swallowed by the roar of the crowd. "Every case Brooks has presided over, every sentence he's handed down, it's all compromised if there's been undisclosed family interest." The protesters surged forward, their voices joining in spontaneous hymns that had once given strength to civil rights marchers. "We shall overcome" echoed off the courthouse walls, the same song that had been sung in these very streets during the 1960s, when Brooks's father had been coordinating with Klan members to silence voting registration drives. But through the chaos, Evelyn's eyes remained fixed on something that made her blood run cold. In the back corner of the gallery, barely visible through the sea of bodies, a figure in a charcoal suit and fedora was moving against the crowd, slipping toward the rear exit with the practiced ease of someone who'd planned this exact moment. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. The mysterious man, the one who'd been feeding her information for months, guiding her toward this explosive revelation, touched the brim of his fedora in acknowledgement. But his expression wasn't triumphant. It was calculating, almost predatory, like a chess player who just sacrificed a queen to expose the enemy king. Tom Riley, still clutching his briefcase with shaking hands, approached the bench cautiously. "Evelyn, what are you doing? You can't just—" "Read it," she commanded, handing him the yellow document. "Read it aloud so everyone understands what's happening here." Riley's voice cracked as he began, "I, Theodore Brooks, pastor of First Baptist Church of Willow Creek, being of sound mind and body, do hereby confess to the sexual assault of Rosa Carter in September 1971, resulting in the birth of my daughter, Evelyn Rose Carter. As penance for this sin and to ensure justice for the child I abandoned, I name Evelyn Carter as sole executor of the Brooks Family Trust, including oversight of all courthouse appointments, judicial decisions, and church properties." The gallery erupted again, but this time the chaos felt different, less like riot and more like reckoning. Marcus's live stream captured every word, the comment section exploding with viewers who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. "Furthermore," Riley continued, his voice growing stronger, "I direct that my son, Harlan Brooks, shall hold his judicial position only with the consent and oversight of his half-sister, Evelyn Carter, who carries the moral authority this family has lacked for generations." Dale Harlan staggered backward as if physically struck. That's not legally binding," he stammered. "You can't just overthrow a sitting judge with some old piece of paper." But Evelyn had already picked up Brooks' gavel, its weight familiar in her hands, despite having never held it before. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room, a black woman in prisoner scrubs now wielding the same instrument of power that had oppressed her people for decades. "Order!" she commanded, the gavel crashing down with the authority of blood and law combined. "Order in this court!" The room fell silent, stunned by the sight of justice literally changing hands. Confederate portraits seemed to lean forward in their frames, their painted eyes witnessing the death of everything they'd represented. "For decades, you silenced us," Evelyn declared, her voice filling every corner of the courthouse. "You buried our voices beneath your gavels, suffocated our truth with your precedents, crushed our dignity under the weight of your so-called justice. But blood doesn't lie, and DNA doesn't discriminate. Your own bloodline has handed me this gavel, and I intend to use it." The visual was electric.
a black woman in orange scrubs standing behind the judicial bench where her own half-brother had sentenced countless members of her community. Marcus's camera captured the perfect shot. Evelyn holding the gavel high, Confederate portraits glowering impotently from the walls, and a gallery full of faces experiencing the birth of a new South. This court is hereby adjourned, pending full investigation of corruption charges, Evelyn announced. All sentences handed down by Judge Harlan Brooks will be reviewed for bias and conflict of interest. Justice delayed is not justice denied, it's justice finally arriving. District Attorney Patricia Lawson made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. This is highly irregular. Even if that will is authentic, it doesn't give you authority to what? Evelyn's eyes blazed as she turned toward the prosecutor. To demand transparency from a court that's been bought and paid for by family money? To question sentences handed down by a judge who knew he was condemning his own sister's people? The only thing irregular here is how long it took for the truth to surface. Deputies stood frozen, uncertain whether to arrest the woman now claiming legal authority or to escort her to freedom. The chain of command had shattered along with every assumption about power in Willow Creek. The mysterious note burned in her pocket. Find the family Bible before they burn it. Someone was already searching the church, and it wasn't the righteous kind of searching that happened during Sunday services. These were desperate people looking for evidence to destroy, secrets to bury deeper than they'd ever been buried before. Marcus sat beside her in the passenger seat, his phone still buzzing with interview requests from national media outlets. "Mom, are you sure about this? We could just walk away now. You proved your point, exposed their corruption. Why risk going into that church when we don't know who's in there?" Evelyn's fingers traced the DNA documents that had transformed her from defendant to dynasty destroyer in the span of an afternoon. Because walking away is what they're counting on, baby. They think a black woman will be satisfied with just embarrassing them, that I'll take my victory and disappear back to Elm Street like a good little nurse who knows her place. She pointed toward the church, where shadows continued moving behind stained glass. But that Bible in the attic contains more than just family genealogy. It's got records of every dirty deal, every cover-up, every dollar that passed through this church to buy silence and maintain power. If we don't get it tonight, it'll be ashes by morning. The rumors had been spreading through Willow Creek's digital underground all evening. Whispers about church embezzlement that funded more than just Florida vacations. Drug money laundered through collection plates. Murder investigations derailed by Brooks' family influence. Voting records destroyed to silence black voices during every election since the 1960s. Deacon Samuel Wright had called Evelyn an hour earlier, his voice trembling with decades of suppressed knowledge. "Sister Carter, I've been waiting 50 years for someone with the courage to look in that attic. Your father, Theodore Brooks, he kept records of everything. Called it his insurance policy against the family that wanted to destroy him for fathering a black child." The church's back door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling onto the gravel parking lot where Evelyn's mother had once parked her rusted Buick before cleaning communion cups and scrubbing floors on her hands and knees. Rosa Carter had died, never knowing her daughter would one day return to claim what their shared bloodline had hidden in the shadows above the sanctuary. "You don't have to come with me," she told Marcus, but he was already opening his car door. "Like hell, I'm letting you go in there alone. Besides, somebody needs to keep live streaming in case they try to disappear us like they disappeared Tommy Jackson and all the others who got too close to the truth." The church smelled like old wood polish and decades of hushed confessions, but tonight it carried something else. The acrid scent of paper being burned somewhere deep in the building. They were too late for some secrets, but hopefully not for all of them. Footsteps echoed from the sanctuary as Evelyn and Marcus slipped through the back door, moving past the kitchen where church ladies had prepared countless potluck dinners while their husbands buried evidence in the basement below. The attic entrance was hidden behind the choir loft,
The evidence was damning. Forged deeds, manufactured tax liens, and mysterious accidents that claimed the lives of farmers who refused to sell their land for pennies on the dollar. The Brooks family hadn't just built their empire on sexual assault and judicial corruption. They'd constructed it on the bones of black families driven from their ancestral soil. Marcus grabbed his laptop and external hard drive, the same equipment he'd used to live-stream his mother's courthouse triumph. But this wasn't about social media fame anymore. This was about survival and the responsibility that came with knowing truth that powerful people would kill to suppress. The garage felt different now, violated by hands that had invaded his sanctuary to hang symbols of terror. But as he surveyed the damage, something caught his eye beneath the workbench where the noose had been hanging, a leather-bound ledger that definitely hadn't been there before. Someone had planted evidence along with the threat. The ledger's pages crackled with age as Marcus opened it, revealing handwritten entries dating back to 1963. But these weren't ordinary accounting records. They were payment vouchers for services that made his blood run cold. October 15th, 1963, $500 to D. Kelly for Jackson problem resolution. November 3rd, 1965, $750 to B. Patterson for voter registration interference. March 22nd, 1968, $1,200 to M. Harrison for activist relocation services. Each entry was signed with the same flourishing script, H. Brooks, Circuit Judge. Harlan Brooks's father had been paying for murder. The Jackson problem referred to Jerome Jackson, a civil rights organizer who disappeared while registering black voters in 1963. His body was never found, but the family had always suspected foul play. The activist relocation services were clearly euphemisms for assassination, black leaders who'd mysteriously vanished or died in accidents that silenced their voices forever. Marcus's hands trembled as he photographed each page, uploading the images to encrypted cloud storage that not even federal agencies could easily access. But as he worked, footsteps crunched on gravel outside his garage. 3 figures in dark clothing stood silhouetted against the streetlight, their faces hidden beneath baseball caps and bandanas. The middle figure held something that gleamed metallic in the pale illumination. Not a gun, but something worse. A can of gasoline. "Marcus Carter, you got something that don't belong to you, boy. Hand it over, and maybe you live to see sunrise." But Marcus was already moving, clutching the ledger in his laptop as he slipped toward the back door of his garage. The men outside hadn't counted on him being awake, hadn't expected him to discover their planted evidence before they could find it and eliminate both the book and its discoverer. His motorcycle sat in the far corner, keys hanging from the ignition where he'd left them after his last ride. The engine roared to life just as the first Molotov cocktails shattered against the garage's front wall, flames licking across motor oil stains and climbing toward the rafters. Marcus burst through the rear garage door as the structure erupted behind him, the ledger tucked inside his jacket and his laptop strapped to his back. The motorcycle's headlight cut through Alabama darkness as he raced toward the interstate, knowing that staying in Huntsville meant death and that running might only delay the inevitable. But 20 miles south of the city, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Against every instinct screaming at him to ignore unknown callers, he pulled over and answered. "Marcus Carter?" The voice was educated, careful, with traces of an accent he couldn't place. "I know about the ledger. I planted it in your garage because you're the only person with both the technical skills and the moral courage to make sure it reaches the right people. The Harlans are cleaning house tonight, burning records, eliminating witnesses, erasing 50 years of documented crime." Marcus pulled into a 24-hour truck stop.
Evelyn's hands shook as she photographed each page with her phone,
the camera flash illuminating horrors that had been buried in scripture for 6 decades. The Bible wasn't just a book of spiritual guidance. It was a confession booth where Theodore Brooks had recorded every crime his family committed, every life they'd destroyed, every soul they'd crushed beneath the machinery of white supremacy. March 22, 1968, 3 more activists relocated permanently. Harlan's orders. Bodies in the old Stewart quarry, weighted down with farm equipment, told their families they'd been arrested and transported north. The footsteps were getting closer. Heavy boots on wooden stairs that creaked with the weight of men who'd come to destroy evidence. But Evelyn couldn't stop reading. Loose photographs tucked between pages showed faces she recognized, living people who'd participated in lynchings and cover-ups that stretched into the present day. Sheriff Bobby Patterson, now in his 70s, but still wearing a badge, grinning beside a tree where rope burns were still visible on the bark. Dale Harlan's father, the previous police chief, posing with Klan members outside a burning church in 1965. Judge Brooks himself, barely out of law school, helping to bury evidence that would have convicted his own family of mass murder. December 15, 1975. Harlan wants me to destroy these records, says the past should stay buried. But God sees everything, and someday, someone will need proof of what we've done. Hidden this Bible where only family can find it. My insurance against their amnesia. The attic entrance creaked as someone began climbing toward her hiding place. Evelyn stuffed the photographs into her jacket and kept reading, racing through decades of documented horror as approaching voices grew louder. January 8, 1980. Land grab complete. 17 black families driven off their property through manufactured tax liens and mysterious accidents. Combined acreage now worth $2.3 million. Harlan bought it all for $2.3 million. Harlan bought it all for $47,000 through shell companies. June 12, 1985. Drug money flowing through church collection plates. Birmingham suppliers using our congregation to launder cash from crack sales. Harlan's cut funds his judicial campaigns and family vacations. September 4, 1992. Covered up another rape. Harlan's nephew Dale forced himself on the Peterson girl, but she's black and he's a cop. Made the family take $5,000 to stay quiet. The horror was systematic, generational, woven into the very fabric of Willow Creek's power structure like cancer metastasizing through healthy tissue. Every authority figure, every respected family, every pillar of the community was connected to crimes that would have triggered federal intervention if anyone had possessed the courage to speak truth to power. July 17, 1998. I'm dying. Lung cancer from chain-smoking guilt. Leave this record for Evelyn Carter, my daughter born from sin, but carrying the only righteousness this family has ever known. She alone has the blood right to expose what we've buried. The final entry was dated 3 days before Theodore Brooks's death, his handwriting shaky, but his purpose clear. He'd known his confession would eventually surface, known what his illegitimate daughter would someday claim her inheritance of truth and use it to burn down the empire built on her people's bones.
"She's up there," a voice shouted from below. "Attic access behind the choir loft." Boots thundered on wooden steps as Evelyn clutched the Bible and its photographic evidence to her chest. But before she could move toward the window that might offer escape, a folded note appeared beside her, placed there by hands she hadn't seen, from a presence that had somehow entered the attic without using the stairs. The note was written in the same careful script that had guided her to this moment. "Expose this, and you'll never leave Willow Creek alive. But stay silent, and they'll kill you anyway. Choose your death, Evelyn Carter. G." The mysterious Gabriel Morrison, the man in the fedora who'd orchestrated her DNA revelation, had been watching from the shadows.
But his warning felt less like protection and more like a chess master moving pieces toward an endgame that only he could see. Light from flashlights pierced the attic entrance as three figures climbed toward her hiding place. Their faces were hidden beneath ski masks, but their intentions were clear: eliminate the witness and destroy the evidence that could topple a dynasty built on blood and lies. Evelyn clutched the Bible tighter, its weight representing 60 years of silenced voices finally demanding justice. The photographs in her jacket showed living faces, people who could still be prosecuted, still be held accountable for crimes they thought were buried forever. But as the masked figures reached the attic floor, their hands revealing weapons that glinted in the flashlight beams, Evelyn realized that truth was worthless if no one lived to tell it. The window behind her offered escape into Alabama night, but jumping meant abandoning the evidence that could free her people from generations of oppression. Staying meant death, but dying might be the only way to ensure the truth survived.
Some secrets are worth dying for, but are they worth killing for? Comment below, because the next choice determines whether justice lives or dies in Willow Creek. 3 weeks later, Evelyn Carter ascended the courthouse steps wearing judicial robes that had never touched black skin in Montgomery County's 157-year history. The federal investigation had moved faster than anyone anticipated, Marcus's leaked ledger entries and Evelyn's Bible photographs triggering a Justice Department response that turned Willow Creek into a crime scene. FBI agents swarmed the town like antibodies attacking an infection, seizing records, interviewing witnesses, and arresting anyone whose name appeared in Theodore Brooks' confession. But today wasn't about federal justice. Today was about something deeper, a reckoning that required blood to judge blood, family to condemn family, truth to triumph over the machinery of oppression that had ground her people to dust for generations. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds gathering on the courthouse lawn to watch live streams that would carry this moment across the world. Marcus stood behind his mother, his laptop capturing every word for an audience that had grown from hundreds to millions in the weeks since the DNA revelation. Judge Harlan Brooks sat in the defendant's chair, his silver hair now white with stress, his empire reduced to ashes and federal indictments. The heart attack had weakened his body, but the exposure of his family's crimes had destroyed his soul. Beside him, Dale Harlan wore prison orange instead of his police uniform, his badge and authority stripped away along with his freedom. The state of Alabama versus the Brooks criminal enterprise, Evelyn announced, her voice echoing off walls that had witnessed a century of legal lynchings. Today, we don't just prosecute individuals, we condemn a system that poisoned justice at its source. The gallery erupted in applause from black families who'd waited generations for this moment. But Evelyn raised her hand for silence, her authority now backed by both federal appointment and the moral weight of blood relationship to the criminals she was judging. Theodore Brooks's confession documents 67 murders spanning from 1963 to 1995. Lynchings disguised as accidents, activists relocated to unmarked graves, families driven from their land through manufactured tax liens and mysterious deaths. The photographs from the Bible now covered evidence boards that lined the courtroom walls, faces of living conspirators who'd participated in mass murder, their crimes preserved in Kodak moments that would send them to federal prison for the rest of their lives. Sheriff Bobby Patterson, you posed for pictures beside Jerome Jackson's lynching tree in 1963. Federal agents found his remains exactly where the confession said they would, chained to concrete blocks in Miller's Pond. Patterson, now 78 and handcuffed to his wheelchair, stared at the floor as cameras captured his shame. The legend of small-town law enforcement had become a war criminal exposed by his own arrogance in documenting atrocities. Chief Deputy Mike Harrison, you helped bury 17 bodies in the Stewart Quarry between 1965 and 1975.
all civil rights workers who disappeared while organizing voter registration drives. Harrison's lawyer attempted to object, but Evelyn's gavel crashed down with the authority of inherited truth. This court recognizes no objections from defenders of genocide. But the most devastating evidence was reserved for the Brooks family itself. Financial records showing how drug money from Birmingham crack dealers had flowed through church collection plates to fund judicial campaigns, lavish vacations, and the purchase of stolen land that formed the foundation of their agricultural empire. Judge Harlan Brooks, you accepted 37 bribes between 1990 and 2023, totaling $2.8 million in drug proceeds. You used that money to maintain power while sentencing black defendants whose only crime was challenging a system you knew was corrupt. Brooks finally looked up, his eyes meeting those of his half-sister for the first time since the DNA revelation. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I didn't know about you, about what Father had done." "But you knew about the murders," she replied, her voice steady as steel. "You knew about the land thefts, the drug money, the bribes that bought your authority. You knew, and you